The thing about betrayal is that it rarely announces itself with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, disguised as late-night work calls and unexplained absences, and a growing distance you convince yourself is just stress. It wears the face of the person you trusted most, speaks in the voice that once promised forever, touches you with hands that have been touching someone else. I'm Brianna Hayes, 32 years old, and I learned this truth on a Sunday morning in Greater Faith Missionary Baptist Church on the south side of Chicago, when my husband of 7 years stood up during testimony service and introduced his new family to the entire congregation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how I got here, sitting in the third pew from the front with my mother on one side and my sister on the other, my hands clenched so tight around my purse that my knuckles had gone white, while my husband smiled like he'd just won the lottery and destroyed my entire life in the same breath. My name is Brianna Michelle Hayes, though I was born Brianna Michelle Campbell in Englewood, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us fed, and a grandmother who made sure we went to church every Sunday whether we wanted to or not. Greater Faith wasn't just where we worshipped. It was where we found family, where we learned our worth, where my grandmother's voice in the choir made me believe in something bigger than our small apartment and our empty refrigerator and my father's absence. I was 8 years old when my father left. Came home from school one Tuesday to find my mother crying at the kitchen table, mascara running down her face, a note in her hand. He'd written 3 sentences. I can't do this anymore. I need to find myself. Take care of the girls. Take care of the girls. Like we were houseplants he was leaving behind. Not his daughters, not his responsibility, not his family. My mother never recovered from that abandonment. Not really. She dated occasionally, but never seriously, never trusting enough to let anyone in. She worked herself to exhaustion at a hospital cafeteria during the day and a cleaning service at night, determined that my sister Janae and I would have better than she'd had. And we did, because of her sacrifice, because of her strength, because she showed us what resilience looked like, even when it came at the cost of her own happiness. My grandmother Doris, Mama D to everyone who knew her, was the stabilizing force in our chaotic world. She lived 3 blocks away in a 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled like vanilla and coffee, where the gospel music played from morning till night, where the Bible sat open on the coffee table with passages underlined in red ink. She'd been a nurse for 40 years before retiring, had raised 5 children, including my mother, had buried 2 husbands, and kept moving forward with a faith that seemed unshakable. Baby girl, she used to tell me, sitting on her couch with me tucked under her arm, the Lord don't give you more than you can handle, but he sure do test you to make sure you know your own strength. I learned my strength early, learned to be the responsible one, the caretaker, the girl who made sure homework got done and bills got paid on time, and my younger sister Janae had someone to look up to. I was the one who kept us together when Mama worked doubles, who cooked dinner from whatever was in the pantry, who walked Janny to school and back even when it was freezing or raining or when the gang activity in our neighborhood made every trip feel dangerous. I was good at taking care of people. It's probably why I ended up in social work. I got a full ride to DePaul University, combination of academic scholarship and financial aid that made college possible for a girl from Englewood. Studied social work because I wanted to help families like mine, wanted to be the person who showed up when everything was falling apart and helped put the pieces back together. Graduated magna cum laude in 2015 with more debt than I wanted but less than I feared, and a job offer at a community social services agency on the West Side. That's where I was working when I met Terrence Hayes. It was October 2017, a young professionals mixer at a downtown hotel that my coworker Shayla had dragged me to. I didn't want to go. I was tired from a week of dealing with domestic violence cases and custody disputes and parents who couldn't afford food for their kids. The last thing I wanted was to put on heels and makeup and pretend to be interested in small talk with strangers. But Shayla insisted. Girl, you need to get out, meet people, have fun. You can't spend every Friday night on your couch eating ice cream and watching crime shows. Why not? That sounds perfect. Because you're 23 years old and you haven't been on a date in 6 months. Come on. 2 hours, that's it. If you hate it, we leave. So I went. Wore a black dress I'd bought on clearance, shoes that hurt my feet, and an attitude that probably showed on my face. That's when Terrence approached me. He was standing by the bar, wearing a suit that looked expensive and a confidence that suggested he'd never known struggle. Tall, about 6'2", with dark skin and a fade that was perfectly lined up, the kind of clean-cut professional look that screamed, I have my life together. He was talking to another man when he saw me, and something shifted in his expression. Interest, maybe. Or recognition of someone who didn't want to be there any more than he did. He excused himself from his conversation and walked over, 2 drinks in hand. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, offering me one of the glasses. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same way. I'm Terrence." He had a nice smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and seemed genuine. "And before you ask, this is just tonic water with lime. I don't drink around people I don't know, and I definitely don't hand drinks to women without telling them exactly what's in the glass." That made me smile despite myself. Cautious. Smart. So is turning down drinks from strangers, but I'm hoping my transparency counts for something. I took the glass, sniffed it, took a small sip. Just tonic water like he'd said. "I'm Brianna. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman." I rolled my eyes. "You can do better than that." "You're right. Let me try again." He paused, studied me with dark eyes that seemed genuinely interested. "You look like someone who's going to change the world, and I'd like to be there when you do it." That was better. That was good enough to make me lower my guard, to ask what he did for work, to find out he was a financial advisor at a firm downtown helping people build wealth and plan for retirement. Good enough to exchange numbers, to agree to a coffee date the following week, to give him a chance. That coffee date turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a Saturday morning at the Art Institute, followed by lunch in Greektown. That turned into regular dates, phone calls that lasted until 2 in the morning, text messages throughout the day that made me smile at inappropriate times during work meetings. Terrence was everything I thought I wanted. Educated, bachelor's from University of Illinois, working on his MBA at Northwestern, employed with a stable career that paid well. Ambitious, talking about starting his own financial planning firm someday, about building generational wealth, about being the kind of black man who showed up and stayed. He asked about my work and actually listened when I talked about difficult cases, about systemic failures, about families caught in cycles of poverty and trauma. He didn't offer shallow solutions or tell me to just find a different job if it stressed me out. He engaged with the complexity, asked thoughtful questions, donated to causes I mentioned. He was good to my family too. Charmed my mother by fixing things around her apartment that had been broken for months. The leaky faucet in her bathroom, the wobbly table in her kitchen, the loose railing on her front steps. Sat with Mama D at her kitchen table drinking coffee and listening to her stories about nursing in the 60s and 70s, about marching for civil rights, about raising children in a city that didn't always value black lives. "That's a good man," Mama D told me after Terrence's 3rd visit. "He reminds me of my second husband, God rest his soul. The kind of man who shows up. Don't let that one go, baby girl." I didn't plan to let him go. After a year of dating, when Terrence proposed on Christmas Eve in Mama D's living room with my whole family watching, I said yes without hesitation. The ring was modest. He'd saved for 3 months to afford it, but it was perfect. And more importantly, he'd asked for my mother's blessing beforehand, had involved my family in the planning, had made it clear that marrying me meant becoming part of something bigger than just the 2 of us. We got married at Greater Faith on a Saturday in June 2019, exactly 7 years ago. It was a small wedding. We didn't have money for anything elaborate, but it was beautiful. Mama D sang the Lord's Prayer while I walked down the aisle on my mother's arm. Janae was my maid of honor, wearing a lavender dress she'd picked out herself. Terrence cried when he saw me, actual tears running down his face, and I knew in that moment that I'd made the right choice. Pastor Williams, who'd known me since I was a child, who'd baptized me at 12 and counseled me through my teenage years, performed the ceremony. When he asked if Terrence would take me to be his lawfully wedded wife, for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish. From this day forward, till death do us part, Terrence looked directly into my eyes and said, "I do," with a conviction that made me believe him completely. "I do," he said, and every word felt like a promise I could build my life on. I believed him. God help me. I believed him with my whole heart. If you're watching this story unfold, thank you for being here. Hit that subscribe button because what happens next is going to take you on a journey through betrayal, revelation, and ultimately, redemption. You're going to want to see how this ends. The first year of our marriage was everything I'd hoped it would be. We moved into a small 2-bedroom house in Bronzeville, a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying, but still had pockets of longtime Black residents who remembered when it was the heart of Chicago's Black Renaissance. The house was a fixer-upper, 90 years old, needed new plumbing and electrical work, had original hardwood floors that were scratched and dull. but it was ours. We spent weekends working on it together. Terrence would research how to do repairs on YouTube, and we'd tackle projects that probably should have been left to professionals, but that we couldn't afford to hire out. We painted every room, stripping away decades of bad choices, yellow kitchens and pink bathrooms and that awful popcorn ceiling in the bedroom. We refinished the floors ourselves, renting a sander and spending 3 days on our hands and knees bringing the oak back to life. We argued about paint colors. I wanted the kitchen to be a soft sage green. He insisted on blue. But even our arguments felt productive, like we were building something together. We compromised on a gray-blue that looked different depending on the light. That satisfied both of us. "This is just the beginning," Terrence would say, standing in the middle of our living room with paint-splattered clothes and sawdust in his hair. "We're building our legacy. Someday our kids will play in this house and we'll tell them about how we fixed it up with our own hands." Our kids. We talked about them constantly that first year. What they'd look like. "Your eyes and my smile," Terrence would say. What we'd name them. Isaiah for a boy, after the prophet. Zora for a girl, after Zora Neale Hurston. How we'd raise them, in church, with an understanding of their history, with opportunities we hadn't had. We started a savings account specifically for future children, called it our baby fund. Contributed to it every month, even when money was tight, even when car repairs or medical bills or emergency house fixes tried to derail us. By the end of that first year, we had almost $8,000 saved. Not nearly enough for everything a baby would need, but it was a start. We went to the marriage enrichment classes at Greater Faith, 8-week sessions led by Pastor Williams and his wife, First Lady Carol. They talked about communication and conflict resolution and financial planning and spiritual alignment, about how marriage was a ministry, a covenant, a sacred partnership that required work and commitment and grace. Terrence participated fully in those classes. He took notes, asked questions, volunteered when Pastor Williams needed examples. He talked about his own parents' failed marriage. His father had left when Terrence was 10, remarried and started a new family, barely maintained contact, and how he was determined not to repeat those patterns. "I'm going to be the kind of husband my father never was," he said during one session. "The kind of man who keeps his promises, who shows up every day, who makes his wife feel cherished and secure." Everyone in the class nodded approvingly. First Lady Carol squeezed his shoulder. "That's the spirit. Marriage is a choice you make every single day." He was making that choice, I thought. We both were. Year 2 started to show some cracks, though at the time I attributed them to normal growing pains rather than warning signs. Terrence's career was taking off. He'd made senior advisor at his firm, which meant more clients, more responsibility, and significantly more money. His income nearly doubled, which should have made our life easier, but instead just seemed to create more stress. He was working longer hours, coming home after 8 or 9 at night, sometimes bringing work home on weekends. "It's temporary," he'd say when I complained about how little time we spent together. "I'm building my reputation. Once I have enough clients and experience, I can start my own firm and set my own hours. But right now, I have to prove myself." I understood that. I was working long hours too, handling a caseload of 40 families, dealing with crisis after crisis, bringing work stress home even when I tried not to. So I gave him grace, told myself it was just a season, believed him when he said it would get better. But the distance between us was growing. We'd stopped having long conversations about our days, our dreams, our feelings. Dinners became silent affairs where we'd both scroll through our phones, too tired to engage. Sex became infrequent and perfunctory, something we did out of obligation rather than desire. I suggested we start trying for a baby. We'd been married 2 years, we were financially stable enough, and I thought maybe having a child would bring us closer together, give us something to focus on besides work. Terrence said he wasn't ready yet, wanted to wait until his career was more established, until we had more savings, until the house was completely renovated. "Let's give it another year or 2, he said. "I want to be able to provide everything our kids need, not just scrape by." It made sense logically, but it hurt emotionally. I was 30 years old, aware that my fertility wouldn't last forever, eager to become a mother. But I deferred to him, told myself he was being practical, tried to focus on other things. I threw myself deeper into my work, took on extra cases, volunteered to lead trainings for new social workers, started a support group for mothers dealing with the foster care system. My supervisor noticed and nominated me for a leadership program, a year-long intensive that would prepare me for management positions. I was excited about the opportunity and told Terrence over dinner one night expecting him to be proud and supportive. Instead, he frowned. How much time will that take? 1 evening a week plus some weekend workshops. That's a lot of time away from home. You're never here anyway. You work until 9 most nights. That's different. I'm building our financial future. And I'm building my career. Why is your work more important than mine? I didn't say it was more important. I'm just saying we need to be strategic. My income is 3 times yours. It makes sense for me to prioritize my career growth. The conversation devolved into an argument, the first real fight we'd had in months. I accused him of being unsupportive. He accused me of being selfish and not understanding the pressure he was under. We went to bed angry, sleeping on opposite sides of the mattress with a chasm between us that felt wider than the physical distance. The next morning, he apologized. Said he'd been stressed, hadn't meant to diminish my accomplishments, was proud of me and wanted me to pursue the leadership program. But the damage was done. A seed of resentment had been planted. Year 3 brought more distance, more arguments, more nights spent wondering if this was what marriage was supposed to feel like. Terrence stopped going to church regularly. He'd been attending every Sunday since we met, had even joined the usher board and served communion once a month. But in year 3, it dropped to twice a month, then once a month, then only on major holidays. Easter, Mother's Day, Christmas. I'm exhausted, he'd say when I tried to wake him Sunday mornings. I work 60 hours a week. God understands that I need rest. God also expects us to be in fellowship. You made a commitment when you joined this church. I made a lot of commitments. I can't keep all of them all the time. That statement hung between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to examine too closely. I started going to church alone most Sundays, sitting in our usual pew without him, making excuses to people who asked where he was, feeling the weight of judgment from older church mothers who remembered when we'd been newlyweds attending service together every week. Everything okay with you and Brother Terrence? First Lady Carol asked me one Sunday after service. Just busy with work, I said, the lie smooth because I'd practiced it. Marriage is work too, she said gently. Don't forget to tend that garden even when everything else demands your attention. I nodded, thanked her for her concern, went home to an empty house because Terrence was meeting a client on Sunday afternoon, something that was happening more and more frequently. Our sex life had essentially died. Months would go by without intimacy, and when it did happen, it felt mechanical. He wouldn't look at me during, would finish quickly, would roll over and fall asleep without the affection we used to share afterward. I wondered if I was doing something wrong, if I was unattractive to him now, if the stress of work had killed his libido. I tried everything. New lingerie, romantic dinners, explicit invitations. Nothing worked. He always had an excuse. Too tired, too stressed, not feeling well, early morning tomorrow. Mama D noticed something was wrong. She always could read me better than anyone. Baby girl, what's going on with you? She asked one Saturday when I'd come over to help her with grocery shopping. Nothing, Mama D. Just work stress. Don't lie to your grandmother. I know work stress, and this ain't it. This is marriage stress. I broke down then, standing in her kitchen while green beans simmered on the stove, told her about the distance, the lack of intimacy, the feeling that Terrence was pulling away and I didn't know why. Have you talked to him about it? I've tried. He says I'm overreacting, that all marriages go through rough patches, that I need to be more understanding about the pressure he's under. And you believe him? I don't know what to believe. She put her hand on my cheek, the way she'd done since I was a little girl. Trust your gut, baby. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone make you question what you know to be true. But I did question it. I questioned myself constantly. Maybe I was being too demanding. Maybe I was focusing too much on what was wrong instead of appreciating what was right. We had a house, stable jobs, no major conflicts. Maybe this was just what marriage looked like after the honeymoon phase ended. Year 4 brought the first concrete evidence that my gut had been right all along. It was February, Valentine's Day specifically, and I'd planned a special evening. Made reservations at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, bought a new dress, arranged to leave work early. But Terrence called at 4 p.m. to cancel. I'm so sorry, baby. This client needs an emergency meeting. Major portfolio adjustment that can't wait. On Valentine's Day? I know. I'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise. I ate dinner alone at home, crying into a plate of takeout, feeling foolish for trying so hard to salvage something that felt increasingly unsalvageable. The next day, doing laundry, I found a receipt in his pants pocket. For dinner at a steakhouse downtown. On February 14th, for 2 people. Total bill, $247. My hand shook as I held that receipt. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he'd taken the client to dinner as part of the emergency meeting. That would make sense. That would be fine. But something told me to look deeper. I checked our credit card statements, something I hadn't done in months because Terrence handled all our finances. What I found made me sick. Multiple charges at restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel rooms in Chicago when he'd supposedly been at home. Purchases at jewelry stores that I'd never received gifts from. Hundreds of dollars at spas and salons that I'd never visited. When he came home that night, I confronted him, laid out the receipts and credit card statements on our dining table like evidence at a trial. What is this, Terrence? He barely glanced at them. What is what? These charges. Hotels, restaurants, jewelry I've never seen. Where is all this money going? Those are client expenses. I take clients to nice dinners. Sometimes I pay for their hotel when they come in from out of town. I send their wives gifts as a courtesy. It's all part of business development. You bought someone's wife a $600 bracelet for business development? She's the wife of my biggest client. It was her birthday. These are the kinds of relationships I need to maintain if I'm going to grow my business. And the hotel rooms? For out-of-town clients, I told you this already. You told me you were home working late. You said you were at the office. You never mentioned putting clients up in hotels. His face hardened. What are you accusing me of, Brianna? I'm not accusing. I'm asking for an explanation that makes sense. I just gave you one. If you don't believe me, that says more about your insecurity than my behavior. Insecurity? Terrence, we haven't had sex in 4 months. You're never home. You lie about where you are and what you're doing. And now I find charges for hotels and romantic dinners that I'm not part of. How am I supposed to feel? You're supposed to trust your husband. But apparently that's too much to ask. He grabbed his keys and left. Didn't come home until after I'd gone to bed. And when he did, he slept in the guest room. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. Made coffee, kissed my forehead, asked what my plans were for the day. Like we hadn't had a massive fight about suspicious charges and broken trust. I wanted to push harder, to demand real answers, to refuse to let him gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. But I also wanted to believe him, desperately, because the alternative, that he was cheating, that our marriage was a lie, that I'd been wrong about him, was too devastating to accept. So I let it go. Told myself I was being paranoid. Tried to focus on work and ignore the growing pit in my stomach that told me everything was falling apart. That was my mistake. I should have trusted my gut. Should have hired a private investigator right then. Should have protected myself, should have demanded the truth. But I didn't. I gave him grace he didn't deserve, benefit of the doubt he hadn't earned, trust he was actively betraying. And he used that grace to keep destroying me. Year 5 brought more lies, more distance, more evidence that I kept explaining away, because acknowledging it would mean admitting my marriage was over. Terrence started taking weekend trips. Client conferences, he'd say. Miami in March, Vegas in May, Atlanta in June. He'd leave Friday morning and come back Sunday night, exhausted and distant, barely talking about the trips except to say they were productive for networking. I never went with him. He never invited me. Said it wouldn't be appropriate to bring a spouse to professional conferences, that I wouldn't enjoy it anyway because I'd be bored while he networked. I spent those weekends alone in our house working on cases, visiting my mother and sister, going to church and making excuses about where my husband was. In July of year 5, I found the second major piece of evidence. I'd been looking for the title to my car, needed it for insurance purposes, and I knew Terrence kept all our important documents in his home office file cabinet. The cabinet was usually locked, but that day it was open, and I saw files I'd never noticed before. One was labeled SM Personal. I pulled it out, curious what SM stood for. Inside were bank statements for an account I'd never heard of. A joint account at a bank we didn't use, in Terrence's name and someone named Shanice Miller. Thousands of dollars moving in and out every month. Rent payments, grocery purchases, car payments, baby supplies. Baby supplies. I sat at Terrence's desk, that file in my shaking hands, and felt my entire world tilt. Baby supplies. A joint account with someone named Shanice. Money being transferred regularly from our accounts into this secret account. My husband had another life, another relationship, and from the look of those baby supply purchases, maybe another family. I took photos of every document in that file, transferred them to my email, to a cloud drive, made sure I had proof that couldn't be deleted or denied. Then I put the file back exactly where I'd found it and sat in that office trying to breathe through the panic. I could confront him, demand answers, blow up our marriage right now, or I could investigate first, get all the information, make sure I had the full picture before I acted. I chose investigation. The next day, Monday, I called in sick to work. First time in 3 years I'd used a sick day for something other than actual illness, and I hired a private investigator. Her name was Denise Thompson, and she ran her own firm on the west side of Chicago specializing in infidelity investigations. I'd found her through an online search, read reviews from other women who'd hired her, and praised her professionalism and thoroughness. Denise's office was in a nondescript building, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing. Inside, it was all business. Desk, computer, filing cabinets, certificates on the wall proving her licenses and credentials. Denise herself was a black woman in her 50s, wearing professional clothes and a direct gaze that made me feel both comforted and exposed. "Tell me why you're here," she said after we'd exchanged greetings, and I'd sat down in the chair across from her desk. And I told her everything. The distance, the suspicious charges, the secret account, the baby supplies. 5 years of gut feelings and ignored warning signs and evidence I'd explained away. "How long do you think he's been cheating?" she asked, taking notes. "I don't know. A year? Maybe 2? Maybe longer? And you want me to find out who she is? How long it's been going on? Whether there's a child? And what financial implications you need to know about?" "Yes. All of that. I need to know the truth so I can figure out what to do next." "Okay. I'll need access to bank statements, credit card records, his schedule, phone records if you can get them. Anything that might help me track his movements and identify who he's involved with." I gave her everything I had. The photos of the joint account statements, copies of our credit card bills going back 2 years, his work calendar that he kept on a shared Google account, phone records I'd screenshotted from our carrier's website. "This is good," Denise said, reviewing the materials. "This gives me a solid starting point. I should have preliminary findings for you within 2 weeks." "That fast?" "If he's as sloppy as these records suggest, yes. Men who are cheating usually think they're smarter than they are. They leave trails everywhere." I paid her retainer, $3,000 I'd saved from my own paychecks in an account Terrence didn't know about, and left her office feeling strange mixture of dread and relief. Dread about what she'd find. Relief that I was finally taking action instead of just accepting lies. Denise worked fast. Within 10 days, she called and asked me to come to her office. "I found her," she said when I sat down. "Her name is Shanice Miller. She's 26 years old, works as a nurse at Rush University Medical Center, lives in an apartment in Country Club Hills, about 30 minutes south of your house." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photos, surveillance shots of a young woman with caramel skin and long braids, beautiful in a way that made my stomach hurt. Photos of her with Terrence, at restaurants, walking through a park, standing outside her apartment building with his arm around her waist. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Based on credit card records and surveillance, I'd estimate at least 18 months, probably closer to 2 years. 2 years. While I'd been working long hours and going to church alone and wondering why my husband didn't want me anymore, he'd been building a whole separate life with someone else. "There's more," Denise said gently, "and you need to prepare yourself." She pulled out more photos. Shanice holding a baby, a little boy who looked maybe 6 or 7 months old. Shanice and Terrence with the baby at what looked like a park, Terrence holding the child with obvious love and pride. "Is that—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "His son?" "Yes. According to the birth certificate I was able to obtain, the child's name is Terrence Hayes Jr., born August 15th of last year. Father listed as Terrence Hayes." The room spun. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to stay grounded, trying to process what I was hearing. My husband had a son, a 7-month-old baby boy, with a woman who wasn't me. While I'd been begging him to start trying for a baby, while I'd been putting money in our baby fund, while I'd been imagining what our children would look like, he'd already become a father with someone else. "Does she know about me?" I managed to ask. "Yes. She knows you exist and that you're married to him. According to neighbors I spoke with, and I was very discreet, Terrence told her that you two are separated but still living together for financial reasons. That he's planning to file for divorce soon, but wants to get his finances in order first. We're not separated. We still share a bed most nights. We're married in every sense." "I know. He's lying to both of you." "What else do I need to know?" Denise pulled out more documents. "He's been supporting her financially, paying her rent, which is $1,800 a month, covering her car payment, $350 a month, buying baby supplies and formula and diapers. He's also been transferring money from your joint savings account into that joint account with her, the one you found statements for. Over the past 18 months, he's moved approximately $63,000 out of your accounts and into accounts that benefit her. $63,000. Money we'd saved together. Money from the baby fund. Money I'd contributed from my paychecks. My money, stolen to support his other family. Is there anything else? I asked, not sure I could handle more but needing to know the full extent of the betrayal. Yes, about a month ago he purchased a house, a 3-bedroom home in Country Club Hills, not far from her apartment. He paid cash, $47,000. Used money from a savings account you may not know about, one he opened 3 years ago in his name only. She slid another document across the desk. A deed record from Cook County, showing a property at 15247 Sawyer Avenue, Country Club Hills, Illinois. Purchased by Terrence Hayes for $47,000, cash sale, no mortgage. But the house is titled in her name, Denise continued. He bought it, but he put it in Shanice Miller's name, probably to try to hide it from you in case of divorce. But the purchase documents show the money came from his account, which means it's traceable. I stared at that deed, at the proof that my husband had bought a house for his mistress and their child, with money he'd been hiding from me, while telling me we needed to wait longer before buying a bigger house, before starting our own family, before moving forward with our lives. He'd moved forward, just not with me. What do I do? I asked Denise, my voice breaking. That's up to you, but if I were you, I'd do 3 things immediately. First, open a bank account in your name only and transfer half of any joint funds into it. That's your legal right as a spouse. Second, document everything and make multiple copies of all evidence. Third, talk to a divorce attorney about your options and your rights. Okay. And Brianna? Denise leaned forward, her eyes serious. Don't confront him until you've protected yourself financially and legally. Men like this, when they're cornered, they can become vindictive. Clean out bank accounts, hide assets, make your life as difficult as possible. Protect yourself first, then deal with him. I nodded, numb. Paid her final invoice, thanked her for her work, and walked out into the bright July afternoon feeling like I was moving through water. Everything was distorted, surreal, too awful to be real, but undeniably true. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 20 minutes, crying so hard I thought I might throw up. My husband, the man I'd trusted, loved, built a life with, had been living a double life for 2 years, had gotten another woman pregnant while married to me, had bought her a house with money that belonged to both of us, had created an entire parallel family while coming home to me every night and lying to my face. When the tears finally stopped, I did what Denise had suggested. I drove directly to a different bank and opened an account in my name only. Then I went home while Terrence was at work, pulled up our online banking, and transferred exactly half of our joint savings, $32,000, into my new account. I made copies of everything Denise had given me. The photos, the bank statements, the birth certificate, the deed. Put the originals in a safe deposit box at my new bank. Kept copies in 3 different locations: my mother's house, Janae's apartment, and a locker at the social services agency where I worked. Then I called a divorce attorney. Her name was Monica Rodriguez, and she'd been recommended by Janae, who'd used her during her own divorce 3 years earlier. Monica had a reputation for being aggressive and thorough, for taking on cases other attorneys didn't want, for fighting hard for her clients. Her office was in the Loop, in one of those glass towers that made you feel small. But Monica herself was warm when she greeted me, mid-40s with sharp eyes and an accent that suggested she'd grown up somewhere on the South Side. Janae told me you might call, she said. She told me you're going through something difficult. That's one way to put it. I spent the next 2 hours telling her everything. The distance, the evidence, the investigation, the other woman, the baby, the house. Monica took detailed notes, asked clarifying questions, pulled up documents on her computer to check property records and financial regulations. This is actually a very strong case for you, she said finally. The adultery is well documented. The financial fraud, and yes, it's fraud when he uses marital funds to support an extramarital relationship without your knowledge or consent, is documented. The hidden assets are documented. You have everything you need to not just get a divorce, but to get a very favorable settlement. What about the house? The one he bought her. That's marital property. Doesn't matter whose name is on the deed. He purchased it with marital funds during your marriage, which means you have a legal claim to at least half its value. Maybe more than half, given the circumstances. She has a baby. I don't want to make them homeless. Monica looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You're worried about making your husband's mistress homeless? I'm worried about an innocent child who didn't ask to be part of this. That's very noble of you, but that child is not your responsibility. His mother made choices. Your husband made choices. If there are consequences, that's on them. Your responsibility is to yourself. I know, but I'm not trying to be cruel. I just want what's fair. Fair is you getting significantly more than half of everything, given what he's done. But we can push for a settlement that's generous while still protecting your interests. I just need you to be clear. You're not responsible for his other family. You don't owe them anything. I signed the retainer agreement, another $5,000 from my personal account, and left Monica's office with a plan. We'd file for divorce in the next week. We'd claim my portion of marital assets, including half the value of the Country Club Hills house. We'd document the financial fraud and use it to negotiate a favorable settlement. And we'd do all of this while Terrence was still unaware that I knew the truth. The element of surprise is your greatest advantage, Monica had said. Don't give that up by confronting him prematurely. So I went home that evening and acted normal. Made dinner while Terrence was in his office on a work call. Ate with him in front of the television. Went to bed beside him. All while knowing exactly who he was and what he'd done. It was the hardest performance of my life. For the next week, I played the role of unsuspecting wife while preparing to blow up our marriage. I gathered more financial documents. I documented his schedule. I noted every time he lied about where he was going or who he was with. And I planned my revelation. Because I wasn't going to do this quietly. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative, spin the story in his favor, make himself the victim. I was going to expose him publicly, in the place where he'd made his vows, in front of the community that had celebrated our marriage. I was going to bring the truth to church. The plan crystallized on a Sunday night in early August. I was lying in bed, wide awake while Terrence snored beside me, thinking about Shanice and that baby and the house he'd bought them with my money. Thinking about all the lies, all the manipulation, all the times he'd made me feel crazy for questioning him. And I thought about how Terrence always performed for church, how he loved being seen as the successful young professional, the devoted husband, the good Christian man. How he joined the usher board and the finance committee and made sure everyone knew how much he contributed financially. What if I took that performance away from him? What if I exposed the truth in the place where his reputation mattered most? It was risky. It was unconventional. It would definitely be seen as inappropriate by some people, but it would also be undeniable. He couldn't gaslight me in front of 200 witnesses, couldn't rewrite history when the evidence was right there for everyone to see. I called Denise the next day. I need you to do something for me, I said. It's going to sound crazy. Try me. I want to expose him at church, publicly. I want everyone to know what he's done. That's risky, Brianna. It could backfire in ways you can't predict. Or it could give me power. Make it impossible for him to spin this as mutual separation or me being unreasonable. Make it clear to everyone that he's the one who destroyed our marriage. Denise was quiet for a long moment. What do you need from me? I need you to find out if he's planning to bring her to church. He hasn't been going regularly in years, but I heard him mention to someone that he might come this Sunday for Youth Sunday. If he brings her, I want to know in advance so I'm not blindsided. And if he does bring her, then I bring receipts, literally. You're sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Denise did her surveillance, confirmed that Terrence had indeed been planning to bring Shanice and the baby to church on Youth Sunday, August 18th. He'd told her it was time to introduce their family to his church community, that he was tired of hiding their relationship, that everyone needed to know the truth. He wanted to control the narrative. He wanted to paint himself as the good guy who'd moved on from a failed marriage and found love again. He wanted the church's blessing for his new family. What he didn't count on was me refusing to play along. That morning, that Sunday, August 18th, 2024, I woke up before Terrence. Got dressed in my best outfit, a deep purple dress with matching shoes and jewelry, armor disguised as Sunday best. I did my makeup carefully, styled my hair, looked in the mirror at the woman staring back at me. She looked strong, determined, ready. I printed out everything. Photos of Terrence with Shanice, the birth certificate for Terrence Jr., bank statements showing the transfers to the joint account, credit card statements with charges for hotels and restaurants, and most importantly, the deed. The deed to 15247 Sawyer Avenue, Country Club Hills, Illinois, showing that Terrence Hayes had purchased a house with cash and titled it in Shanice Miller's name. I put everything in a manila folder and slid it into my purse. Then I went downstairs and made breakfast like it was a normal Sunday, like I wasn't about to detonate my entire life in front of my church family. Terrence came down at 9, looking polished in a navy suit and tie. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his cufflinks, checking his phone repeatedly. "You going to church today?" I asked casually. "Yeah, figured I should make an appearance. It's been a while." "Good, I'm glad. Maybe we can sit together like we used to." Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "Actually, I might meet you there. I have a quick stop to make first." "What kind of stop?" "Just picking up something. I'll see you there." He left before I could ask more questions, and I knew where he was going. To pick up Shanice and the baby, to bring his other family to my church. My mother picked me up at 9:30. She still didn't know anything was wrong. I'd kept this secret close, not wanting to worry her, not wanting to hear her say, "I told you so," about a marriage she'd had reservations about from the beginning. "You look beautiful, baby," she said when I got in her car. "Thanks, Mama." "Everything okay? You seem tense." "Just a lot on my mind." She squeezed my hand. "Well, whatever it is, take it to the Lord. He'll work it out." If only she knew I was about to make church the most dramatic it had been in decades. Greater Faith Missionary Baptist Church looked the same as it had every Sunday of my life. The same brick exterior, the same steps my grandmother had climbed for 50 years, the same sense of sanctuary and community and belonging. I was about to shake that sanctuary to its foundation. Janae was already inside, saving our usual spot. Third pew from the front, right side, the same seats the Campbell women had claimed for 3 generations. She hugged me when I arrived, immediately sensing something was off. "What's going on?" she whispered. "You'll see. Just stay close to me." My mother settled on my left side, Janny on my right. The choir was warming up, their voices filling the sanctuary with old hymns and new praise songs. People filed in, greeting each other, laughing, catching up on the week's news. And then Terrence walked in. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, looking nervous and beautiful in a modest yellow dress, was Shanice Miller. In her arms was a baby boy, maybe 8 months old now, wearing tiny dress clothes and looking around with wide eyes at all the new faces. My mother gasped. Janae grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. "Brianna," my mother whispered urgently. "What is happening?" "Wait," I said. "Just wait." I watched Terrence scan the sanctuary, his eyes landing on me. For just a moment, our gazes locked. I saw confusion flash across his face. Confusion that I was there, that I was sitting in our usual spot, that I looked calm instead of devastated. He'd expected me not to come. Or maybe he'd expected me to make a scene immediately, to give him an excuse to paint me as the unreasonable one. Instead, I smiled. A cold, knowing smile that said I knew exactly what was about to happen. He hesitated, then started walking down the aisle. Toward me. Toward our pew. Shanice followed, clearly uncomfortable, adjusting the baby in her arms, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. They reached our pew. Terrence gestured to the space beside me, the space where he usually sat. "Brianna, can we talk outside for a minute?" he asked, his voice low but strained. "No. Sit down or leave, but we're not going outside." "It's important." I said sit down. Something in my tone must have warned him not to push. He sat on the other side of Shanice, putting her between us, like she could be a buffer for what was coming. The baby made cooing sounds, innocent and oblivious to the bomb about to explode. My mother was staring at Shanice, at the baby, then at me, piecing things together with growing horror. Jenny was texting furiously on her phone, probably alerting her friends to the drama about to unfold. Service started at 11 sharp. Worship team led us in praise songs. "How Great Is Our God," "Goodness of God," contemporary music that the young people loved and the older saints tolerated. The energy in the sanctuary was high, everyone celebrating Youth Sunday when the young adults took over leadership. I sat through it all, my purse in my lap, my hands calm, my heart pounding. Pastor Williams gave a brief message. He always did on Youth Sunday, keeping it short so the young people could have more time for testimony and ministry. He talked about the importance of authenticity, of being the same person in church as you were outside church, of letting your life be a testimony to God's transforming power. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then came testimony time, the part of service when anyone could stand up and share what God was doing in their life, ask for prayer, celebrate victories, confess struggles. Several young people went first. A sister thanking God for healing from surgery. A brother celebrating acceptance to graduate school. A young woman praising God for helping her overcome addiction. And then Terrence stood up. My breath caught. This was it. The moment everything changed. "Praise the Lord, saints," he said, his voice strong and confident. The congregation responded with, "Praise the Lord," and "Amen," that call and response rhythm that was second nature to anyone who'd grown up in Black church. "I want to thank God today for the blessings in my life," Terrence continued. "For the past 2 years, God has been doing a new thing in my life that I haven't talked about publicly, but I can't stay silent anymore. 2 years, he was going to lie about how long he'd been cheating, make it seem like less than it actually was. I want y'all to meet someone very special," he said, gesturing to Shanice. She stood up slowly, the baby on her hip, looking uncertain but trying to smile. "This is Shanice Miller, and this is our son Terrence Jr." Gasps rippled through the sanctuary. People leaning forward, whispering, trying to process what they were hearing. "God brought Shanice into my life when I was in a very dark place," Terrence said, his voice taking on that testimony cadence, that rhythm of dramatic storytelling. "My marriage to Brianna had been over for a long time. We'd been separated, living separate lives, and both knew it was just a matter of time before we made it official." Lie. Complete lie. But he was selling it well, his voice full of conviction. "Shanice brought light back into my world when I'd lost hope. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And God blessed us with this beautiful son, this miracle child who reminds me every day that redemption is real." More gasps. Some people were nodding, moved by what they thought was an honest testimony. Others were looking at me, waiting for my reaction. I stayed still, silent, waiting. "I know some people won't understand," Terrence continued. "I know marriage ending is hard, and I don't take it lightly. But sometimes God's plan means releasing what isn't working and embracing what He has for you. And today I want to publicly acknowledge this woman, this child, my new family. I want to thank God for second chances and fresh starts." He looked at Shanice with such tenderness, such false devotion, that I almost believed he meant it. "I'm asking this church family to embrace them," he said, "to welcome Shanice and little Terrence, to celebrate with me that God is not done writing my story." He sat down to scattered applause, some people clapping enthusiastically, moved by what they thought was a story of redemption. Others clapping tentatively, uncertain what they'd just witnessed. Many not clapping at all, looking between Terrence and me, sensing something wasn't adding up. Pastor Williams started to stand, clearly intending to navigate this unexpected moment with grace and wisdom. But before he could speak, I stood up. Every eye in that sanctuary turned to me. "That's interesting," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent space, "because I didn't know we were separated." You could hear a pin drop. Terrence's face went pale. "Brianna, don't do this." "Don't do what? Tell the truth? You just told this entire congregation that our marriage was over, that we were separated and living separate lives. But I was in our bed, in our house, with my husband, you, just last night." The whispers erupted into exclamations. People standing up to see better, others pulling out phones to record, everyone realizing they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Brianna, this is not the place," Terrence tried. "You made it the place," I said calmly. "You stood up here and lied to these people who know me, who know us, who celebrated our marriage 7 years ago. So let me balance your lies with some truth." I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila folder, holding it up so everyone could see. Pastor Williams found his voice. "Sister Brianna, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No, Pastor," I said respectfully but firmly. "My husband just gave public testimony full of lies. I'm giving public testimony full of truth. These people deserve to know what they're really celebrating." I opened the folder and pulled out the first photo. Terrence and Shanice at a restaurant, clearly on a date. "This photo was taken in February of last year," I said. 18 months ago, not 2 years. And it wasn't after our separation because we were never separated. I can show you credit card statements from that same week showing charges for our household bills, our joint purchases, our life together. I pulled out more photos. These are from March, April, May. Surveillance photos showing my husband and this woman together while he was supposedly working late, while he was telling me he was too stressed for intimacy, while he was lying to me about where he was and who he was with. Terrence stood up, reaching for the photos. "You had me followed? You violated my privacy? You violated our marriage vows," I shot back. You violated our sacred covenant before God. Don't talk to me about privacy when you've been living a double life. I turned to the congregation, to faces I'd known my whole life. I want y'all to see something. I pulled out the birth certificate. This is a birth certificate for Terrence Hayes Jr., born August 15, 2023, which means he was conceived in December 2022. And you know what else happened in December 2022? My husband and I attended marriage enrichment classes right here at this church. We sat in Pastor Williams' office and recommitted to our vows. While I was recommitting, he was already having an affair. She was probably already pregnant. Shanice was crying now, the baby starting to fuss in response to her distress. She looked at Terrence with betrayal dawning in her eyes. You said you were separated. You showed me documents. He showed you fake documents, I said, not unkindly. He lied to you too. Maybe not about everything, but about enough. I pulled out the bank statements. These show transfers from our joint accounts to accounts I didn't know existed. Over $60,000 moved without my knowledge or consent to support his relationship with her. Money I earned. Money we were supposed to be saving for our future, for the children we were supposedly going to have together. He stole it. The sanctuary erupted. People shouting, arguing, some defending Terrence, others demanding answers. Pastor Williams was trying to restore order, but the dam had burst. And then I pulled out the deed. I held it up high enough for everyone to see. This is a deed to a house at 15247 Sawyer Avenue in Country Club Hills, purchased in April of this year for $47,000, cash. The buyer was my husband, Terrence Hayes, but the title is in her name. I pointed at Shanice, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her. My husband used marital funds, money that legally belongs to both of us, to buy his mistress a house, without my knowledge, without my permission, and definitely without any separation or divorce papers filed. I walked toward the front of the sanctuary, standing near the pulpit where Pastor Williams performed our wedding ceremony 7 years ago. Terrence stood up here and told you a story about redemption and second chances. But redemption requires repentance. And you can't repent of something you're lying about. He didn't confess adultery. He didn't acknowledge stealing from our marriage. He tried to rewrite history, to make himself the victim of a failed marriage and me the obstacle to his happiness. I looked directly at him. But I'm not an obstacle. I'm a woman who kept my vows, who worked hard to build our life, who loved you even when you stopped loving me, who believed your lies because I wanted our marriage to succeed, and you repaid me by betraying every promise you ever made. Tears were running down my face now, but I didn't wipe them away. Let everyone see the cost of his choices. You bought her a house with my money. You had a baby with her while telling me we needed to wait. You built an entire life behind my back and thought you could just announce it in church and everyone would celebrate with you. I held up the deed one more time. But this document proves you're a thief. These bank statements prove you're a liar. And your presence here today with her proves you're a manipulator who thinks he can control the narrative if he just tells his lies confidently enough. I handed the folder to Pastor Williams, who took it with shaking hands. His face was ashen, his eyes moving between the documents and Terrence with disbelief and disappointment. Pastor, everything you need is in there, I said. Bank statements, photos, the deed, everything. All dated, all documented. When Terrence comes asking to serve in leadership, when he tries to join committees or represent this church, I want you to remember what he did. How he lied to me, to her, to you, to everyone. How he used scripture about second chances to justify ongoing deception. I turned back to Shanice, who was sobbing openly now. And you, I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. Not entirely. He lied to you about our marriage, made you think he was available. But you did know he was married. You had his baby while he was legally bound to someone else. And now you're going to raise that child, knowing he was conceived in deception. I looked at the baby, at his innocent face, at Terrence's features stamped on that tiny person. I hope he's a better father to you than he was a husband to me. Finally, I turned to Terrence one last time. I want a divorce. My lawyer will be contacting yours. And I want my money back, half the value of that house, half of everything you stole, half of the life you destroyed. The locks on our house will be changed by Monday. If you show up, I'll call the police. The sanctuary was chaos now. People crying, shouting, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Pastor Williams was calling for order, for calm, for everyone to please be seated so he could address what had happened. But I was done. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd exposed the truth. I'd taken back my power. I picked up my purse, that manila folder having served its purpose, and I walked out of that sanctuary with my head high. My mother and Janae followed immediately, their heels clicking on the tile floor in rhythm with my own. Behind us, I could hear Pastor Williams trying to restore order, could hear Shanice's crying and the baby's wails and Terrence's voice trying to explain, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. But I didn't look back. I just kept walking. Out the doors, down the steps, across the parking lot where August's sun beat down like judgment. When we reached my mother's car, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Brianna Michelle Campbell," she said, using my full maiden name. "What the hell just happened in there?" And then I broke. All the strength and composure I'd maintained inside the sanctuary crumbled, and I fell into my mother's arms, sobbing, big, ugly, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my soul. "He bought her a house, Mama," I cried. "With our money. He has a baby, and he was going to stand up there and lie about all of it, make everyone think I was the problem, make me look like I was standing in the way of his happiness. I know, baby. I know. What do I do now? Now?" My mother pulled back to look at me, her hands on my face. "Now you fight. You get every penny of that money back. You divorce him and you move on with your life, and you hold your head high because you didn't do anything wrong. He did." Janae pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Monica. She needs to know what just happened." They took me to my mother's house, the house where I'd grown up, where my grandmother had lived until her death 3 years ago. We sat in the kitchen that still smelled like her, vanilla and coffee and Sunday dinners, and I told them everything I hadn't told them before. The investigation, the evidence, the months of planning this revelation, the choice to do it publicly instead of privately. "Some people are going to think you were wrong," my mother said, "going to say you should have handled it privately, that you brought shame on yourself and the church. I know, but I think you did what you had to do. He forced your hand by bringing her there, by lying to everyone. You just made sure the truth got told too." Janae was scrolling through her phone, showing me the texts and Facebook posts already flooding in. The church confrontation had been recorded by multiple people, was already going viral in local circles. Some messages were supportive. She did what she had to do. He deserved that. Good for her for not staying silent. Others were critical. That was inappropriate. She should have handled it privately. You don't air your dirty laundry in God's house. And some were just curious, asking for details, wanting the full story, treating my pain like entertainment. "Turn it off," I told Janae. "I don't want to see any more." But then one message came through that made me pause. From Shanice. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He showed me papers. Said you were divorced. I thought, I'm so sorry." I stared at that message for a long time before responding. "I believe you. Take care of your son." That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with my mother asleep down the hall and Janae on the couch, I pulled out my phone and looked through all the messages properly. Most were from church members, friends, family, co-workers, checking on me, offering support, asking if there was anything they could do. And one was from Terrence. "You went too far. You humiliated me. We could have handled this privately." I laughed out loud at that. I went too far? I wasn't the one who'd had an affair for 2 years, fathered a child with another woman, stolen $60,000, bought a house behind my spouse's back, and then tried to introduce the other family in church while lying about the circumstances. But sure, I went too far by telling the truth. I didn't respond. Blocked his number, blocked him on social media, cut off every avenue of communication except through lawyers. I was done hearing his voice, reading his words, giving him any space in my head. Monday morning, I called in sick to work, second time in my career, and met Monica at her office. "I saw the videos," she said when I walked in. She was trying to look professional, but I could see the hint of a smile. That was bold. Was it stupid? Legally? No. You established your awareness of the assets, your intent to claim them, and you did it in front of hundreds of witnesses. He can't pretend he didn't know you knew. He can't hide anything now. You actually made my job easier. What happens next? Now we file for divorce. We claim your portion of all marital assets, including half the value of that house. We document every dollar he stole and every lie he told. And we negotiate a settlement that reflects the severity of his fraud and adultery. The divorce papers were filed by Wednesday. Terrence was served at his office, which he apparently hated because several of his co-workers witnessed it. Good. Let him feel a fraction of the humiliation he'd put me through. He tried to contest everything. His lawyer, some expensive white man in a downtown firm, Filed motions claiming the house was a gift to Shanice and therefore not marital property, claiming the transfers were for legitimate business purposes, claiming I was being vindictive and unreasonable. Monica demolished every argument with documentation and evidence. Bank records showing the money came from our joint accounts, the deed showing Terrence as purchaser, surveillance photos proving the affair, birth certificate proving the child. His case is garbage, Monica told me in September. And he knows it. He's just dragging it out to punish you, hoping you'll give up or settle for less. I'm not giving up. Good, because we're going to win. The next few months were hell. Terrence waged a war of harassment, showing up at my mother's house until we got a restraining order, calling my job until HR had to intervene, sending emails that alternated between apologetic and threatening. The church was split. Some people supported me, said I'd done the right thing, thanked me for exposing someone who'd been using his position for credibility while living a lie. Others said I'd brought shame on the church, should have handled it privately, made everything worse by going public. Pastor Williams called me in September, asked me to come to his office. I went reluctantly, expecting a lecture or maybe a request to leave the church. Instead, he apologized. "Sister Brianna," he said, his voice heavy, "I want to say I'm sorry." "For what, Pastor?" "For not seeing what was happening. For almost letting Brother Terrence stand in that pulpit and deceive this entire congregation. If you hadn't brought forward the truth, we would have celebrated his testimony. We would have welcomed that woman and child without knowing the destruction that led to their existence. I hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected validation from church leadership. Some people think I was wrong," I said. "Think I should have kept quiet. Some people will always think that. But I've been pastoring for 35 years, and I've learned that truth matters more than comfort. Yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, it was unconventional. But it was honest. And this church needs more honesty, even when it's painful." We talked for over an hour about marriage, betrayal, forgiveness, healing. Pastor Williams didn't minimize what Terrence had done or suggest I should take him back. He acknowledged the abuse, financial, emotional, spiritual, and supported my decision to divorce. "What about him?" I asked. "What's going to happen with his membership?" "He'll face church discipline. He can't serve in any leadership capacity. He'll need to go through a restoration process if he wants to remain a member in good standing. And that process will require real repentance, real restitution, real change." "Do you think he'll do it?" Pastor Williams sighed. "Honestly, no. Men like Brother Terrence, men who can lie that boldly, who can manipulate that skillfully, rarely have the humility required for real repentance. But I'll give him the opportunity. What he does with it is between him and God." I left that meeting feeling lighter. The church leadership wasn't condemning me. I hadn't lost my spiritual home. If anything, Pastor Williams suggested I was modeling something important: the courage to tell the truth even when it cost you comfort. The divorce mediation happened in November, 6 months after the church confrontation. We sat in a conference room downtown, me with Monica, Terrence with his lawyer, Shanice representing herself because the house was technically in her name. Shanice looked different, tired, older, disillusioned. Being a single mother was probably nothing like Terrence had promised. He probably wasn't showing up the way he'd said he would. The mediator, a patient woman in her 60s, worked through the numbers. Our Bronzeville house was worth about $210,000 with $85,000 left on the mortgage. The Country Club Hills house was worth about $150,000, fully paid off. We had about $28,000 left in various accounts after his transfers and my protective withdrawal. Monica's position was clear. I should get the Bronzeville house, my car, my retirement account, and $75,000 representing half the value of the Country Club Hills house. Terrence could keep his car, his retirement account, and deal with the consequences of his choices. "That's not fair," his lawyer argued. "The Country Club Hills property is titled in Ms. Miller's name. My client gave it to her as a gift." "Your client committed fraud," Monica interrupted. "He used marital funds without my client's knowledge or consent to purchase property for his mistress. That's not a gift. That's theft. And we have documentation of everything." We mediated for 8 hours. Terrence tried to negotiate down to $40,000. Monica held firm at $75,000. The mediator kept us focused, kept emotions from derailing progress, kept reminding everyone that going to trial would be expensive, time-consuming, and likely result in outcomes nobody wanted. Finally, they agreed to Monica's terms. I'd get the house, my car, my retirement account, and $75,000 to be paid over 3 years. Terrence kept his car and retirement. Shanice kept the house, but would need to refinance or sell to pay me my portion. What am I supposed to do? Shanice asked, tears in her eyes. I can't afford a $75,000 mortgage on my salary. I have a baby. I can't lose my home. You should have thought about that before you got involved with a married man, Monica said bluntly. I didn't know. You knew he was married. Maybe you didn't know all the details, but you knew that much. And you chose to proceed anyway. These are the consequences. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But Monica was right. Shanice had made choices too. Not as many as Terrence, not with as much deception, but she'd known he wasn't fully available, and she'd chosen him anyway. The divorce was finalized in January 2025, 7 months after that Sunday at Greater Faith. Terrence Hayes and I were no longer married. 7 years of my life, over. Just like that. I kept his last name for professional reasons. All my credentials and licenses were in that name, and changing them felt like more hassle than it was worth. But emotionally, spiritually, I was Brianna Campbell again. The woman I'd been before him. Or maybe someone new entirely. Someone forged in the fire of betrayal and reborn in the courage of truth-telling. The settlement played out over the next 3 years. Terrence paid me $25,000 a year, grudgingly, always late, always with some complaint about how I was ruining his life. Monica had to threaten contempt of court charges twice to get him to pay on time. Shanice ended up selling the Country Club Hills house in the spring of 2025. She couldn't afford the mortgage payment to me, couldn't maintain the property, couldn't make it work as a single mother on a nurse's salary. The house sold for $160,000, and after fees and closing costs, I got my $75,000 in full. I used that money wisely. Paid off my student loans completely. $32,000 of debt that had been hanging over me since college. Invested $20,000 in my retirement account, securing my future. Put $15,000 into a high-yield savings account as an emergency fund, and used the remaining $8,000 to completely renovate the Bronzeville house. I gutted Terrence's office, the room where he'd conducted so many secret phone calls, where he'd hidden documents about his other life, turned it into a meditation and reading room, painted it a soft lavender, filled it with plants and comfortable furniture, and books that fed my soul. I repainted the bedroom we'd shared, a color he'd never chosen, a shade that was entirely mine. I replaced the mattress, the sheets, every piece of furniture that held memories of him. I was erasing him from my space, reclaiming the house as mine. My mother was my rock through all of it. She'd come over on weekends to help with renovations, bringing food and wisdom, and the kind of love that doesn't ask questions, just shows up. We'd paint walls together while she told stories about her own marriage to my father, about the betrayal she'd endured, about how she'd survived. You're stronger than I was at your age, she told me one Saturday in March, both of us covered in paint while we worked on the living room. When your daddy cheated, I just took it, made excuses for him, blamed myself, tried to be better, prettier, more accommodating. That wasn't your fault, Mama. I know that now. But back then, I thought if I could just be perfect enough, he'd stay. Took me years to realize that his leaving had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with him. Do you ever regret staying as long as you did? Every day. But I also don't regret it, because staying gave me time to prepare. By the time he left, I had my own bank account, my own job, my own plan. If he'd left earlier, I would have been completely dependent on him. Is that why you never really trusted Terrence? Because you saw something of Daddy in him? She was quiet for a moment, her paint roller moving in steady strokes. I saw a man who was very good at performing, very good at saying the right things, looking the right way, playing the part. Your daddy was like that too. Charming as hell. Everyone loved him. Nobody saw what happened behind closed doors. I wish you'd told me. Would you have listened? Probably not. I'd been so in love, so convinced Terrence was different, so determined not to repeat my mother's mistakes that I'd walked right into different versions of the same patterns. Janae moved in with me for a while, splitting rent and bills, keeping me company in the house that felt too big for one person. She was teaching at a charter school on the west side, coming home exhausted every day with stories about students who broke her heart and inspired her in equal measure. You ever think about dating again? She asked one night in May, both of us sitting on my newly renovated back porch, drinking wine and watching the sunset. Sometimes, but I don't trust my judgment anymore. Your judgment was fine. He was just a really good liar. I ignored red flags, Janae. The distance, the late nights, the defensive reactions when I asked questions. I saw all of it and talked myself out of believing what I was seeing. That's not bad judgment. That's being human. That's wanting your marriage to work. Maybe. You're 33 years old. You have so much life ahead of you. Don't let him steal your future along with your past. She was right. I knew she was right. But the thought of trusting someone again, of being vulnerable, of risking that kind of pain, it felt impossible. I threw myself into work instead. My supervisor had promoted me to senior case manager, overseeing a team of 5 social workers, coordinating complex cases, interfacing with court systems and government agencies. The work was hard but meaningful, and I was good at it. I also started speaking. Word had spread about what I'd done, the church confrontation, the deed, the public truth-telling. Other women started reaching out, asking if I'd come speak to their groups, their churches, their organizations. At first I said no, uncomfortable with the attention, unsure what I'd even say. But then a woman named Keisha contacted me in June. She ran a domestic violence shelter on the South Side and wanted me to speak to the women there about financial abuse. A lot of these women don't even realize they're being financially abused, she explained. Their partners control all the money, hide assets, steal from joint accounts. They think it's normal. I want them to hear from someone who recognized it and fought back. That I could do. That felt purposeful. I spoke at the shelter on a Tuesday evening in July to about 20 women ranging from early 20s to late 50s. I told them my story, the hidden accounts, the stolen money, the house purchased without my knowledge. I explained what financial abuse looked like, how to document it, what legal protections existed, and then I told them about the church confrontation. I'm not saying everyone should do what I did, I said. Going public is risky, and it's not right for every situation. But I am saying you don't have to stay silent about abuse just because it's uncomfortable to speak up. You don't have to protect your abuser's reputation at the cost of your own truth. The women asked questions for over an hour. How did I know when to leave? How did I find a good lawyer? How did I protect myself financially? What about the baby? Did I have any relationship with him? Did I ever regret going public? I don't regret it, I told them honestly. Not for a second. Yes, it was messy. Yes, some people judged me. But I took my power back. I made it impossible for him to control the narrative. And that freedom was worth every uncomfortable moment. After the talk, women lined up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. One woman, maybe 25, pulled me aside. I think my boyfriend is doing what your husband did, she said quietly. He controls all our money, won't let me see bank statements, gets angry when I ask questions. But we have a daughter together and I don't know how to leave. I gave her Monica's card, gave her the number for the shelter, gave her permission to trust her gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything, protect yourself, and when you're ready to leave, make sure you have support. She thanked me with tears in her eyes, and I realized this was what I was supposed to do with my pain. Turn it into purpose. Use my story to help other women recognize abuse and find their way out. I started speaking regularly. Shelters, churches, women's groups, professional organizations. I developed a talk called When the Deed Came to Church, telling my story but also providing practical advice about financial abuse, divorce, healing. The response was overwhelming. Women everywhere had similar stories. Husbands who hid money, partners who stole, men who used financial control as a weapon. Many had stayed silent because they didn't know they had options. Others had spoken up and been told they were being dramatic, vindictive, bitter. You gave me permission to tell the truth, one woman told me after a talk in September. I've been keeping my ex's secrets for 2 years because I didn't want people to think badly of him. But why am I protecting someone who hurt me? Why indeed? It was a question I'd asked myself repeatedly. Why had I protected Terrence for so long? Why had I made excuses for him, covered for his absences, stayed quiet about my suspicions? Because I'd been raised to believe that good women keep their marriages together no matter what. That airing dirty laundry was shameful. That failure to keep a man was a reflection of your inadequacy as a woman. But I'd learned differently. I'd learned that protecting an abuser's reputation was another form of abuse, of yourself. That staying silent about wrongdoing enabled the wrongdoing to continue. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is tell the truth, even when it's ugly. Pastor Williams invited me to speak at Greater Faith in October during their women's conference. I was nervous. This was the church where everything had exploded, where some people still viewed me as someone who'd caused unnecessary drama. But I went, stood in front of 200 women and told my story again. The betrayal, the investigation, the confrontation, the aftermath. And then I talked about healing. I'm not going to lie and say I'm completely healed, I told them. I still have moments where I'm angry, where I wonder if I'll ever trust anyone again, where I see a father with his child and think about the family Terrence built with someone else while lying to me about wanting kids with me. The women nodded, understanding in their faces. But I'm also freer than I've been in years. I'm living in my own truth. I'm not performing for anyone. I'm not making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's lies. And that freedom is worth every difficult moment of the past year. The applause was thunderous. Women standing, some crying, many shouting affirmations. First Lady Carol came up on stage and hugged me, whispering, "Thank you for your courage," in my ear. After the conference, multiple women approached me with similar stories. Affairs discovered, money stolen, lies exposed. Some had handled it privately, others publicly. All of them were walking the difficult path of healing after betrayal. We exchanged numbers, created a group chat, started meeting monthly for dinner and support, called ourselves the Truth Tellers, women who'd chosen honesty over comfort, who'd spoken up instead of staying silent, who were rebuilding their lives with authenticity. That group became family. We celebrated victories together, divorces finalized, promotions earned, new relationships started. We mourned losses together, the death of dreams, the grief of broken families, the pain of starting over. We held each other accountable when we started slipping into old patterns of people-pleasing or self-blame. "You saved my life," one woman named Michelle told me in November. She'd discovered her husband had a whole second family in another state, had confronted him publicly at a work event using tactics similar to mine. "I didn't know I could do that. I thought I had to handle it quietly. But seeing what you did gave me courage to speak up." Her words hit me deeply. I hadn't meant to become an advocate, hadn't intended to build a movement. I just wanted to tell the truth on one Sunday morning. But that truth had rippled outward, giving other women permission to speak their own truths. By the end of 2025, I'd spoken at over 30 events, had been interviewed for local news segments about financial abuse, had been invited to train social workers and therapists about recognizing and responding to economic abuse in relationships. What had started as the worst day of my life had become a platform for helping others. Mama D would have been proud. She'd always said, "God wastes nothing, baby girl. Even your pain has purpose." Christmas 2025 was the first one I spent truly single in 9 years. No husband to buy gifts for, no in-laws to visit, no performance of marital happiness required. Just me, my mother, Janae, and a few close friends. We made it beautiful, cooked a massive dinner together, exchanged thoughtful gifts, laughed until our stomachs hurt. I decorated my house, not ours, with lights and a tree and stockings that spelled out the truth. This was my home now, my space, my life. "You look happy," my mother said Christmas night, both of us cleaning up the kitchen while Janae and her boyfriend watched a movie in the living room. "I am happy. Or at least I'm becoming happy." "There's a difference?" "Yeah, happiness isn't a destination, it's a practice. Some days I'm better at it than others." She hugged me, her arms strong despite her 62 years. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." "You think?" "I know. She never believed in suffering in silence. She'd have loved what you did at church that day." We both laughed at that. Mama D definitely would have brought receipts. She'd probably have gone even harder than I did, pulled out a slideshow and commentary. New Year's Eve, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I drove to Country Club Hills, to the house Terrence had bought with our money, and I looked at it. It had sold the previous spring, but I'd never seen it in person, never wanted to. But something drew me there as 2025 turned to 2026. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure, maybe just the need to see with my own eyes what he'd valued more than our marriage. It was a nice house, not extravagant, but solid. 3 bedrooms, small yard, attached garage. The kind of house we'd talked about buying someday, when we had kids, when we'd saved more money. He'd bought this house for her while telling me we needed to wait. I sat in my car across the street, engine running to stay warm, and I felt nothing. No anger, no jealousy, no pain. Just a distant acknowledgement that this building had once represented my husband's betrayal, but now was just a structure where strangers lived. That's when I knew I was healing. When the evidence of his affair didn't gut me anymore. When I could look at the tangible proof of his deception, and feel detached instead of destroyed. I drove home and spent New Year's Eve alone by choice, reflecting on the 18 months since my life had imploded. I'd survived public humiliation. I'd navigated a contentious divorce. I'd rebuilt my finances. I'd turned my pain into purpose. I'd helped dozens of other women find their own courage. At midnight, I stood on my back porch with a glass of champagne and made promises to myself to keep healing, to keep growing, to keep telling the truth even when it was uncomfortable, to stay open to possibility even while protecting my heart. 2026 brought unexpected developments. In February, I got a call from a literary agent who'd seen videos of my talks online. "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" she asked. "Not really. I'm a social worker, not a writer. You're a storyteller, and your story could help thousands of women who'll never attend one of your talks. Think about it." I thought about it. Talked to my mother, to Janai, to the truth tellers, to Pastor Williams. Everyone encouraged me to do it. So I did. Spent 6 months writing about my marriage, the betrayal, the investigation, the church confrontation, the divorce, the healing. It was painful, reliving every moment, putting it all on paper, knowing strangers would read my most vulnerable experiences. But it was also cathartic. Writing forced me to process things I'd been avoiding, to find meaning in the mess, to articulate what I'd learned. The book was published in early 2027, titled The Deed When Truth Came to Church. It became a regional bestseller, got picked up by book clubs and women's groups, sparked conversations about financial abuse and public versus private truth-telling. Some reviews were glowing, a necessary book for anyone navigating betrayal, honest and powerful, a roadmap for reclaiming your voice. Others were critical, too vindictive. She comes across as bitter. The church confrontation was inappropriate, and she doesn't seem to realize it. I'd learned to hold praise and criticism loosely. Both had truth in them. I was bitter sometimes. Who wouldn't be after what I'd been through? And maybe the church confrontation was inappropriate by conventional standards, but it was also necessary for me, and that was what mattered. The book tour took me across the Midwest: Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Milwaukee. At every stop, women showed up with their own stories. Some brought deeds and bank statements and divorce papers, tangible proof of their own betrayals. Others just brought their presence, their witness to my story, their gratitude for my honesty. "You made me feel less alone," a woman told me in Detroit. "I thought I was the only one who'd been through something this crazy." That became the refrain everywhere I went. I thought I was alone. I thought no one would believe me. I thought I was overreacting. We weren't alone. We weren't crazy. We weren't overreacting. We were women who'd been betrayed and had chosen truth over comfort. In June 2027, 3 years after that Sunday at Greater Faith, I did something I'd been working up to in therapy. I reached out to Shanice. Not to become friends, I wasn't interested in that, but to clear the air, to separate her from Terrence's actions, to acknowledge that we'd both been victims of his lies, even if our experiences weren't equivalent. We met at a coffee shop in Hyde Park, neutral territory for both of us. She looked different than I remembered. Older, more tired, but also more grounded. Motherhood had changed her. You could see it in her face. "Thank you for meeting me," she said when we sat down. "I'm honestly not sure why I agreed to this. I've been wanting to apologize, really apologize, not just text. I was young and stupid, and I believed him when he said you two were separated. You were young, not stupid. He was very convincing. Did you know he's engaged again?" My stomach dropped. "What?" "Yeah, to someone new. Got engaged last month. I saw it on Facebook." I felt nothing. Or at least, I felt surprised that I felt nothing. Terrence was getting married again, probably telling his new fiancée some version of the story where I was the villain and he was the victim, and I simply didn't care. "Good luck to her," I said finally. "That's it? You're not angry?" "Why would I be angry? She's getting the same man I divorced. If she wants him, she can have him. I'm too busy building my actual life to worry about his fictional one." Shanice smiled at that. "You really are free of him, aren't you?" "Completely. I'm not. I don't love him anymore. But I'm tied to him forever through Terrence Jr. He's supposed to have visitation every other weekend, but he cancels half the time. He's behind on child support. He promises to do better, and then doesn't. That sounds familiar. I should have listened to you. That day at church, when you said he wouldn't change. You were right. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. But for what it's worth, you and your son are better off with an inconsistent father than with a man who's actively deceiving you. We talked for another hour. About motherhood, about healing, about the ways Terrence had manipulated both of us. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was understanding. Two women who'd been hurt by the same man, finding common ground in their survival. Before we parted, Shanice asked, "Do you ever regret it? The church thing?" "Never. Not once. Even though everyone was talking about you, even though it was all over social media, even though some people think you were wrong, even though all of that, because I told the truth, and the truth mattered more than my reputation." She nodded slowly. "I wish I had your courage." "You do. You're raising a child alone, working full-time, making it happen despite everything. That's courage." We hugged before leaving, an awkward embrace between women who'd never be friends, but who'd found a way to be civil. And as I drove home, I realized I'd needed that conversation more than I'd known. Needed to see that she was just a person, flawed and complicated. Not the villain in my story, even if she'd played a supporting role in my betrayal. That summer, I started dating. Nothing serious at first. Coffee dates, dinners, getting used to the rhythm of getting to know someone new. I was clear from the beginning about my history, about what I'd been through, about my need for honesty and transparency. Some men ran. Others claimed to be different but showed the same red flags: evasiveness about their phone, vagueness about their schedule, defensiveness when I asked questions. I walked away quickly from those situations, no longer willing to ignore my gut for the sake of giving someone a chance. And then in September, I met someone who felt different. His name was Marcus, which made my mother laugh. "Another M name? Really?" It's not his fault his parents chose that name. Marcus Washington was a high school counselor on the North Side, divorced for 5 years after his wife left him for someone else. He had 2 teenage daughters who lived with him full-time, was active in his church, coached basketball for a youth program. He was also completely transparent. Gave me his phone without me asking, introduced me to his daughters on our 3rd date, talked openly about his divorce and what he'd learned from it. "I know what betrayal feels like," he said over dinner one night. "My ex-wife's affair wasn't as elaborate as what you went through, but the lying, the gaslighting, the feeling crazy for noticing things that didn't add up. I know all of that. How did you heal? Therapy? Time? Faith? And mostly, being honest with myself about the warning signs I'd ignored. She'd been unhappy for years, and I'd convinced myself everything was fine because I didn't want to deal with the problems. Do you think you'll ever marry again? Maybe. If I find someone who's as committed to honesty as I am. Someone who'll tell me the truth even when it's hard. Someone who won't let resentment build up until it explodes." We took it slow. 6 months of dating before we became exclusive. Another 6 months before we said, "I love you." We went to couples therapy proactively, not because we had problems, but because we wanted tools to handle problems when they inevitably arose. By the time Marcus proposed in June 2028, 4 years after my church confrontation, I was ready. Not just ready for him specifically, but ready to trust again. Ready to believe that not all men were like Terrence. Ready to build a life with someone who valued honesty as much as I did. We got married in September 2028 at Marcus's church on the North Side, a small ceremony with just family and close friends. Pastor Williams officiated at my request, bringing together my past and my future in a way that felt healing. When he asked if I took Marcus to be my lawfully wedded husband, I said I do, with absolute certainty. And when Marcus said his vows, promising to love me, honor me, be truthful with me, build a life of transparency and trust, I believed him. Because he'd spent 2 years proving those promises before we ever got to the altar. My mother cried happy tears. Jenai was my maid of honor again, this time celebrating a marriage she actually believed in. Marcus's daughters were in the wedding party, nervous but welcoming of me in their lives. It was everything my first wedding wasn't. Honest, intimate, grounded in reality instead of fantasy. At the reception, which was just a backyard barbecue at Marcus's house, First Lady Carol pulled me aside. "I'm so proud of you," she said, "for getting remarried, for healing enough to try again, for not letting what Terrence did make you bitter and closed off, for staying open to love. It wasn't easy. The best things never are. Life with Marcus was different than life with Terrence in every possible way. We talked about everything. Finances, schedules, feelings, concerns. We had joint accounts, but also separate ones. We made major decisions together. We went to therapy regularly, treating it like routine maintenance instead of crisis intervention. His daughters, Maya, 15, and Aaliyah, 17, Took time warming up to me, which I understood. I wasn't trying to be their mother, just a supportive presence in their lives. We bonded over cooking, over talking about college plans, over their questions about my work and my book. Ms. Brianna, Maya asked me one night while we were making dinner, "Do you still think about your ex-husband?" "Sometimes, but not in the way you might think. I don't miss him or wish things were different. I think about him as a lesson learned." "What did you learn?" "That I should always trust my gut. That honesty matters more than comfort. That I'm strong enough to start over even when it's scary. I want to be like you when I grow up," she said quietly. "Like me how?" "Brave. You told the truth even though it was hard. Even though people judged you. That's brave." I hugged her. This girl who wasn't mine biologically but who I was learning to love. "You're already brave. You survived your parents' divorce. You welcomed me into your life. That takes courage." In 2029, 5 years after the church confrontation, I was invited to give a TED Talk. The topic was the power of public truth-telling in private relationships. I almost said no. TED Talks felt too big, too official, too far from the social worker identity I'd held for so long. But Marcus encouraged me. "You have something important to say. People need to hear it." So I said yes. Spent months preparing, working with a speaking coach, refining my message. The talk was recorded in Chicago in front of a live audience, including my mother, Janae, Marcus, the truth tellers, and many of the women I'd met along the way. I told an abbreviated version of my story: the betrayal, the investigation, the decision to confront Terrence publicly, the aftermath. And then I talked about what I'd learned about truth-telling. "We're taught from a young age that certain truths should stay private," I said. "That airing dirty laundry is shameful. That protecting our abusers' reputations is more important than protecting ourselves. But I want to challenge that narrative." The audience was silent, attentive. When someone harms you, they forfeit their right to your silence. When someone lies to an entire community about the nature of their betrayal, you don't owe them privacy. And when telling the truth publicly is what you need to reclaim your power, then that's what you should do. I talked about the difference between vindictiveness and self-advocacy, about how telling the truth isn't the same as seeking revenge, about how sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, for others who might be in similar situations, is to refuse to protect someone who's hurting you. Will everyone understand? No. Will some people judge you? Absolutely. Will it be uncomfortable? Without question, I said. But I promise you this: the freedom that comes from living in your truth is worth every uncomfortable moment. The power that comes from refusing to be silenced is worth every critical comment. And the healing that comes from naming what happened to you is worth the temporary shame others might try to place on you. The standing ovation lasted over a minute. People crying, people nodding, people seeing their own stories reflected in mine. The TED Talk went viral when it was posted online. Millions of views, thousands of comments, countless women sharing their own stories of betrayal and the choice to speak up or stay silent. It was picked up by major media outlets, sparked conversations on social media, became required watching in some therapy and social work programs. I received hundreds of messages, from women who'd exposed their partner's affairs publicly, from men who'd been cheated on and didn't know they could advocate for themselves, from therapists thanking me for normalizing truth-telling instead of always prioritizing privacy, from pastors rethinking how they handled adultery and abuse in their congregations, and one message from Terrence's new wife. "Thank you for your honesty," she wrote. "I watched your TED Talk and realized I needed to investigate the man I married. Turns out he's been lying to me too. I'm filing for divorce and I wanted you to know that your courage gave me courage." I stared at that message for a long time. Terrence had done it again. Found someone new, lied to her, betrayed her. And maybe he'd keep doing it forever, because that's who he was at his core. A man who could look you in the eye and lie without remorse. But she'd found out early, before too much damage, because she'd watched my story and learned to trust her gut. That felt like a strange sort of victory. By 2030, 6 years after that Sunday at Greater Faith, my life looked nothing like I'd imagined it would back when I was married to Terrence. I'd remarried a good man who actually kept his promises. I was a stepmother to 2 smart, kind girls who called me not Mom, but Brianna, and who I loved deeply. I'd written a book that had helped thousands of women. I'd become a speaker and advocate, traveling the country to talk about financial abuse and the importance of truth-telling. I'd continued my social work career, now as a director overseeing programs that helped families in crisis. My house in Bronzeville had appreciated significantly, worth over 300,000 now, fully mine, a symbol of my survival and rebuilding. I'd invested wisely, saved aggressively, built the kind of financial security Terrence had tried to steal from me. I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not the performance of happiness I'd maintained during my first marriage, but real contentment with my life, my choices, my journey. I still had hard days. Trauma doesn't disappear just because you've healed. But the hard days were outnumbered by good ones, and I had tools to handle them. In August 2031, 7 years after the church confrontation, Greater Faith held an anniversary celebration. 75 years of ministry, of serving the community, of being a beacon on the South Side. Past and present members were invited to share testimony about what the church had meant to them. I was asked to speak. At first I declined, didn't want to bring up old drama, didn't want to be that woman who exposed her husband anymore, but Pastor Williams insisted. "Your story is part of this church's story," he said, "and it's important that we acknowledge both the pain and the healing that happened within these walls." So I agreed, stood in front of the congregation on a Sunday afternoon in August, 7 years almost to the day after my life had imploded in this very sanctuary. 7 years ago, I began, I stood in this church and told a truth that was painful and uncomfortable, and that some people thought should have stayed private. I exposed my husband's betrayal in front of all of you, brought documents and evidence, made what was hidden visible. The sanctuary was quiet. Many of the people who'd been there that day were still members, still remembered. Some of you supported me. Others thought I was wrong, that I'd handled things poorly, that I'd brought shame on the church. And honestly, I understood both reactions. What I did was unconventional, uncomfortable, disruptive. I paused, looked around at familiar faces. But it was also necessary. For me, for my healing, for my future. Because if I'd stayed silent that day, if I'd let my husband stand up here and lie without challenge, I would have been complicit in my own erasure. I would have protected his reputation at the cost of my own truth. Heads nodded. People leaned forward. What I want to say today, 7 years later, is thank you. Thank you to those who supported me immediately. Thank you to those who struggled with what I did but ultimately came to understand it. And even thank you to those who judged me, because your judgment taught me that I can't live my life worried about everyone's opinion. I looked at Pastor Williams, at First Lady Carol, at my mother and Janae and Marcus. This church taught me faith, but it also taught me that faith without honesty is empty, that you can't have real community without real truth, that sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is refuse to let lies stand, even when speaking truth costs you comfort. I pulled out a piece of paper, not the deed this time, but something else, a quote I'd found that had carried me through the hardest days. James Baldwin wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." 7 years ago, I faced my reality publicly, and that facing, as painful as it was, allowed me to change my life completely. I looked out at the congregation, at the church that had witnessed my lowest moment and was now celebrating my healing. I'm remarried now, to a good man. I'm a stepmother to 2 beautiful girls. I've written a book, started a nonprofit, traveled the country helping other women find their voices. I've rebuilt my life from the ground up. None of that would have been possible if I'd stayed silent that Sunday morning. The congregation erupted in applause, people standing, shouting affirmations. It felt different than 7 years ago. Less chaos, more celebration, less judgment, more recognition of the journey I'd walked. After the service, people lined up to talk to me. Some wanted to apologize for how they'd responded initially. Others wanted to share their own stories of finding courage to tell difficult truths. Many just wanted to say they were proud of me, glad I'd stayed at Greater Faith, grateful I'd survived. And one person, an elderly woman I didn't recognize, grabbed my hand and said, "You did what I was too scared to do 50 years ago. Watching you speak up gave me closure for my own silence." That's when I fully understood the ripple effect of that Sunday morning. My truth-telling hadn't just freed me. It had given permission to countless others to tell their own truths, to refuse their own silences, to demand better for themselves. As I left the church that afternoon, I thought about the different versions of myself who'd walked through those doors over the years. The young girl being raised by my grandmother, the hopeful newlywed believing in forever, the devastated wife discovering betrayal, the warrior woman carrying a deed to church, and now this version, healed, whole, free. All those versions were me. All those experiences were mine. And together, they'd created someone who knew her worth, who trusted her gut, who valued truth over comfort. I thought about Terrence sometimes, but less and less as the years passed. He'd remarried and divorced again, I'd heard through mutual acquaintances. Still working as a financial advisor, still charming, still probably lying to whoever his current partner was. Some people never changed, but I had changed. Fundamentally, irrevocably, for the better. I'd learned that I could survive betrayal and come out stronger, that I could stand up for myself even when it cost me approval, that I could tell the truth even when it was uncomfortable, that I could build a life I actually wanted instead of settling for what others expected of me. And most importantly, I'd learned that bringing the deed to church, that act of public truth-telling that some people still thought was inappropriate, had been the most appropriate thing I could have done for myself, because it had forced everyone, including me, to stop pretending, to acknowledge reality, to deal with what was actually happening instead of what we wished was happening. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've walked with me through the betrayal and the confrontation and the healing, I want to thank you. Your witness matters. Your presence in this moment matters. And if you're going through something similar right now, if you're being lied to, if you're having money stolen from you, if you're being gaslit into thinking you're crazy when you're actually seeing the truth clearly, I want you to know something. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to protect someone who's hurting you. You don't have to handle things privately if public truth-telling is what you need. Will it be messy? Yes. Will some people judge you? Absolutely. Will it be uncomfortable? Without question. But your freedom is worth it. Your truth is worth it. You are worth it. I'm Brianna Campbell Washington now, 39 years old, living in Chicago with a husband who actually keeps his vows, raising daughters who are learning that women don't have to make themselves small. I run a nonprofit that helps women escape financial abuse. I speak around the country about the power of truth-telling. I've rebuilt my life completely. And it all started with a deed in my purse, a Sunday morning at church, and the courage to say, actually, that's not true. My husband introduced his new family at church, and then the deed in my purse closed their smiles and opened my future. That's my testimony. That's my story. That's my truth. Hit that like button if this resonated with you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about survival and strength. Turn on notifications because the journey of healing is ongoing, and we're all walking it together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for believing that truth matters more than comfort, that healing is possible after betrayal, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent. God bless. And remember, you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are seeing clearly, and that clarity is your greatest asset. Trust yourself, tell your truth, and know that on the other side of that truth is a life you actually want to live. I'm living proof.